Welcome to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast, your guide to future tech trends and innovation in a language you understand. Now, over to your host, Neil Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. There's only 6 weeks left in 2018. Where's the year gone? Throughout this year, we have seen major corporations fall victims to hacks and harvesting of their own customer information. And millions of customers of some of the most trusted names in business out there, such as Cathay Pacific, Facebook, Apple and Amazon, have had everything from their email addresses, phone numbers and credit card details fall into the hands of nefarious actors. However, as cybercriminals become more sophisticated, technology is paving the way for novel solutions that are being developed which may prove effective in combating these kind of hacks and online attacks experienced by companies of every ilk and size. But I recently discovered a company called Loki that allows users to transact and communicate privately and anonymously all over the internet. And this is made possible by using blockchain technology to decentralize messaging and transaction services. And by doing this, their technology could go a long way in mitigating the risks that are inherent in centrally stored databases, which serve as somewhat of a modern treasure trove of data for hackers. Sounds intriguing, right? That's what I thought. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Melbourne, Australia, so we can speak with Kee Jeffreys, co-founder and tech lead at Loki. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my name's Kee. I'm the technology lead at Loki. It's a pretty all-encompassing role, but basically it means that I lead Loki in the technical direction that it goes in. So that means stuff like writing the white paper, keeping up to date with projects that are doing similar things to us, seeing if we can merge in things from their projects, seeing if we can upstream things that we've done to other projects that we like as well. That's kind of the gist of the role, but it's a lot of writing, a lot of research, and some management as well, because we have a development team here as well.
Now, I have to apologise for this next question because you're probably sick to death of answering it everywhere you go and every conference, but the geek in me has to dive in straight away and say, what's the story behind the name Loki? And did it involve copious amounts of Thor movies?
Yeah, it's actually an interesting one because the naming process was quite weird. When we had this idea of a privacy project and we came into a room and a couple of us got together and we had a whiteboard and people were throwing up names on the whiteboard as we went. And Loki got proposed, but what was actually happening was a lot of names were just being flung away. We don't like this name. We don't like this name. Someone put the name Loki on the board, and we really still don't know who it was. But we kind of justified the name after the fact. So what we say right now is that because Loki is a privacy project, it's a play on words. So low key, that's kind of the idea. Also, we like the idea that it had key in it because we're dealing with cryptography. But yeah, the name has an interesting backstory to it.
Fantastic. I see what you did there. So Loki, like you said, as you said, Loki is a privacy project based on Monero. Can you just set the scene for anyone listening, hearing about you guys for the very first time, and just offer a brief overview of the kind of problems that you're solving and what you're doing?
Yeah, so I guess more and more we're seeing that people's privacy is being taken for granted. We've seen more data hacks. So we saw the Cambridge Analytica thing with Facebook probably about 3-6 months ago. More and more we're seeing intrusion on people's data privacy, and Loki is really a response to that those data privacy breaches. So we see increasingly more and more people coming out with tools. So there's tools that you can keep in your privacy belt to keep you safe online. So you have stuff like VPNs, things like Tor. There's a number of tools out there, and Loki really is another tool to add to the suite of privacy tools that people already have. So if we were to place Loki somewhere in the ecosystem, it's similar to Monero in that it offers a private medium of currency, so I can trade with my friends without people knowing that I was actually trading with them or the amounts that I was sending to them. But it also offers this idea of a second layer of privacy, which is much more related to people's access to the internet. So when I access the internet, essentially I'm making a direct connection to a lot of servers, and they have my IP address, and that's really personal information that we're giving over to private corporations like ISPs and governments. Loki really is a response to try and keep that information as private as possible and only expose when you want to expose your information to these corporations and governments. So like that would be the broader definition. There's a lot of technical detail that you can go into beyond that, but really Loki is just a tool to ensure that you have privacy online.
And like I said a few moments ago, I'm interested in the kind of problems that you're setting out to solve. But for some people listening, they probably don't even know a lot of the problems that are out there. So can you just tell me a little bit more about the current failures of centralized databases and the potential benefits of decentralized networks, including additional privacy and security for end users?
Yeah, so I mean, the problem with centralized databases is that usually you're going to have a company, and more in the world, we're seeing these kind of freemium models, right? Where a service is provided to you for free. Really what happens when you're, getting a service for free is that company is going to try and sell your data. And the data that we generate through these centralized platforms and using their centralized databases really becomes a burden over us. Every time you interact with Facebook or Google, these services that we use every day, every single click that you do on those platforms is tracked. So if we can move away from that, and the problems with that, I hope for most people are obvious, but if Google or Facebook has an overarching amount of information about you and they're selling it to third parties, we've seen what happens when they do this. That we get and I don't want to go into the election too much, but a lot of people were accusing different governments of using this information that was sold from Facebook to selectively advertise political campaigns to people. So it's not just that this information is out there and it's moving around, which it is. It's the insidious way in which governments and corporations can actually use this data to make predictions on what you're going to do. I think there was, and this was like 5 years ago, there was this article, I think it was in the Times, about this case where Target had been tracking this particular user, and they ended up sending her pregnancy information or targeted advertisements for her pregnancy. And at this point, she didn't even know she was pregnant. She was getting ads about pregnancy information, and she went and checked, and she found out she was pregnant. Wow. So just by the things that she was searching, they were able to algorithmically work out that, okay, this is what preemptive mothers search before they are having their child. So, I mean, at the point where a private corporation knows what you are going to do before you know before you know you're going to do it, that's when it becomes really scary. And that's the kind of things that Loki is the problems that Loki is trying to prevent, and that's some of the failings of centralized databases. Yes, they do provide fantastic service, really, really quick speeds, and you can connect with people all over the world. But you've got to remember, when you're not paying for something, you probably are the service that is being sold to other people. Your data is just out there and moving around the world and being bought and sold by corporations.
So true what you're saying there, and I do think there's an increased awareness around the problem. You did kind of mention the election in the US. Of course, over here in the UK, we got the Brexit chaos, and then the Cambridge Analytica stuff as well. So there is that increased awareness. But what is the potential for these new technologies to actually prevent customer data and sensitive personal information from being accessed without our consent or siphoned off to third parties for their own benefits?
I think the best way, and probably the only way to prevent this data from falling into the wrong hands, is to never make this data in the first place. So typically what we're referring to in this case is metadata. So, well, there's kind of two cases of data. So the data that you create on platforms when you interact with them, that's actual data, and that goes directly to Facebook. And then there's also additional data, which is typically referred to as metadata. So this is the stuff that actually isn't the content on the websites, but it's the fact that you visited the website. Loki is really trying to deal more in the metadata space. So we're trying to prevent people from knowing, oh, he called this service at 2:30 in the morning, and that happened to be a phone sex hotline or something like that. Even though you might not know what the actual content that is going through the network is, you can really make some very strong inferences just based on the metadata. If I know two people communicated with each other and what time they communicated at, and what type of service that they're communicating with, I can make some very strong assumptions on what they were doing. So it's not necessarily to say that everyone who uses Loki privacy tools is going to be bad, because 95% of people are just trying to get their privacy back. But these inferences that we make about people can always be used in malicious ways. And even if you're trying to do the most benign things, that can be turned and misused against you. So really, Loki tries to prevent the metadata side of things. So when I communicate with someone, typically in the internet we have IP addresses. So everything has an IP address in the internet. So Wikipedia's servers have an IP address, Google's servers have an IP address, and you also have an IP address as well. What an IP address is it's similar to like a residential address in like the meat space in the real world. So if I have someone's residential address, I can go and visit them. If I have someone's IP address and I'm one of these kind of bigger level, state level actors or ISPs, I can use that IP address to make a connection with their real physical world identity. So it's not just numbers communicating with numbers anymore. It's Kee Jeffreys communicating with the Wikipedia server. And really what Loki tries to do is, instead of communicating directly with IP addresses, we add hops in between. So it obfuscates the links between the IP addresses. So that's kind of what we're trying to deal with Loki.
Fantastic. And just to help people listening visualize the scale of what we're talking about, can you maybe also expand on how applications built on these privacy-centric technologies can actually transform multiple industries going forward?
Yeah, so there's industries that are very ripe for this kind of disruption. So anything where, and we've seen this a lot recently, these social media sites where particular people are being censored away from the social media site. Those industries are very, very ripe for disruption by these privacy services, because if I have a platform where I can readily express myself without the fear of that centralized service essentially blocking me, then it's an extension of free speech. So I would say social media websites are very ripe for disruption by this technology. Messaging services, for example, where I'm sending a message to someone and I don't necessarily want there to be a record created of that. And there's a lot of other services, particularly in government industries, where we actually have an enforcement level behind privacy. So we're seeing the GDPR come out and these regulations around like mandatory privacy needing to be had. So it's not so much anymore about whether I should have privacy or not. It's that it's actually being mandated by the government now that you actually have to have privacy in your communications. So these kind of niche industries is going to disrupt first, but then there'll be this demand, and there already is starting to be this demand for encrypted communication channels, which the government is saying you need because hackers and these governments overseas want this information, and increasingly the EU wants to protect their data, and really Loki is going to fit into that perfectly.
But over here in the UK, we've also had a few heated debates around governments wanting access or a backdoor to those kind of private communications for catching the bad guys. Where do you get the right kind of balance on that?
It's an interesting question, but I have probably more a strong line approach than maybe some of the people in the government. But I would say that as soon as you add a backdoor to an encryption service, the encryption service is now broken. Yeah. Because it's not just the government that can use the backdoor. We know that governments regularly have penetrations happen to them. There's been a number of times where government systems have had malware installed on them. So if you have this encryption key, or decryption key rather, which can take messages and decrypt them, what's to say that decryption key doesn't fall into your government's hands, but instead falls into a government's hands that you don't really agree with? It's you either have security or you don't. It's very black and white in this scenario of encryption. Once you insert that backdoor doesn't just get used by your government. It can also be used by any malicious actor, government or hacker, any person really.
Yeah, I completely agree. So what do you think of this increasing public awareness of the importance of data privacy that we're seeing more and more of now? And how do you think this will actually change the digital landscape in the future?
I think it's really good. I think we're getting a lot more internet and computer literacy in the world. And coming along with that is also literacy in what encryption means. I do worry sometimes that people are going to misconstrue the fact that we have encryption as a bad thing. There's a lot of merchants out there who are selling the idea that encryption is a bad thing and bad people are the ones that use encryption. But in reality, whenever I visit nearly any website on the internet, I'm using encryption to access that website. You know, YouTube, Facebook, Google, all of these services use encryption. And encryption really shouldn't be a political tool. It should be a tool that is, you know, unbiased. It's just like a hammer or a saw. You know, it's used for a purpose. And yes, bad people can use it. Yes, good people can use it. But the fact is, encryption is going to, and it has already changed the entire world.
So from what you've seen, what do you think the nature is and the aims of the online privacy community? Is everyone working towards the same thing?
I don't think so. I think people are working in their own different groups. Maybe we're all working towards a common goal, but it's pretty fractured. So there's people who are working on digital privacy at currency level. So you could look at something like a project like Monero. There are people who are working on internet privacy, so people like Tor. There are people who are working on privacy for operating systems or mobile phones. And that would be maybe someone like who's working on the Tails operating system. There's all kind of these different groups that are working on different parts of privacy. I don't think we're going to see a solution that encompasses all of these things. I think we will still see these small groups that are working towards similar goals. But yeah, I think maybe I contradicted myself. I think everyone is working towards the same goal. I think everyone just has a different vision of how they're going to get there. And that's what breaks us into little groups.
So Loki at the moment, is the project up and running? Do you have a product that people can use at the moment, or is this work in progress?
So it's a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Right now we have cryptocurrency that's live and everyone can use it. It's a fork of Monero, so it has all of the properties that Monero has, and then it's starting to have some of the layer 2 properties that I talked about before. So when I talked about the bouncing between the different nodes, technically in our system, those are called service nodes. And about 3 months ago, we launched that service node network. We're also just starting to bring in the anonymous kind of internet part of it. And that's coming along nicely as well. So you'll see a lot more development for Loki in the next 2 to 3 months. But yes, it is a usable system. You can use it right now as a cryptocurrency to trade amongst your friends. But we'll be seeing the LokiNet part of it and the anonymous internet part of it really starting to come ahead in the next 2 to 3 months.
Excellent. And for people just listening, hearing about you guys for the first time, what is the role of the Loki token?
So Loki is really so the main goal of Loki is to be used as a staking token. So really what we see the problem as in the current mixnet scenario is that they're vulnerable to what are called Siebel attacks. So a Siebel attack is where one person pretends to be multiple people in a distributed system. So if we think about Tor, the privacy model of Tor is that you have all of these nodes in this network. And when I want to communicate with someone on the internet, I use these nodes as hops. And I connect to a couple of them, and I hop my connection through these 3 nodes before it gets to the endpoint, which might be the Wikipedia server. And then the data is collected and sent back to me. So the problem with that system is that anyone can be the servers in that scenario. Anyone can be the 3 hops that you connect to before you get to your endpoint. That means also governments and private corporations can be those 3 hops. And there's been a lot of concern over the past 5 years about whether governments are actually actively participating in the Tor network. And there has been some evidence of that fact. So essentially what Loki does is instead of just allowing anyone to be one of those hops, you have to have a certain amount of the Loki cryptocurrency to be one of those hops. So if a government or a third party comes along and they say, I want to get a lot of these hops in the network so I can start doing network traceability, essentially they have to buy a lot of the Loki cryptocurrency, and because they're buying it through markets, that becomes increasingly harder because there's only a certain amount of Loki you can buy. As you buy more and more, the price goes up, so the attack becomes exponentially hard as you buy more and more Loki. So that's one of the primary uses of Loki, is to create a Siebel-resistant network. The other use of Loki is just as a traditional currency. It provides privacy above and beyond Bitcoin, for example. Bitcoin, every single transaction in the network is traceable. In Loki, we use a number of technologies to obfuscate transactions so that if you were to look at the public ledger, you wouldn't actually see links between different people. So it's a currency and it's a Siebel protection as well.
It's also worth pointing out, I think, that Loki is an open source project, so anyone can contribute to its continued development, can't they?
Yes, and I would love to see more and more open source developers. We have a couple of people who are contributing who are not on the team at the moment, but we have a bad habit of when people contribute to the Loki project, we like hiring them. So that's actually kind of been to our downfall, because nearly all of the open source contributors we've had are now on our team. So if you want to contribute to Loki, please look up Loki and go on GitHub and start doing some open source contributions. And don't be too good, otherwise we'll hire you.
Now, every day on this podcast, I am fortunate to speak with people from all over the world. So I've got to ask, can you tell me more about the state of technology and blockchain sectors over there in Australia? Is it really thriving at the moment?
It's an interesting one. I think the way we see blockchain is highly shaped by the regulation in the country at question. So we're seeing a lot of blockchain innovation coming out of these, they're typically called crypto havens. So stuff like Malta and Vanuatu, who have very relaxed regulations around cryptocurrency, Switzerland. We're seeing a lot of technology come out of these places. I wouldn't say Australia is on the forefront of cryptocurrency regulation. They're probably about the middle of the pack. They're not too aggressive like, say, China or the USA. But there is still a lot of ambiguity here, which has not led to... it has led to an okay ICO scene, but I wouldn't say it's better than any other kind of developed country, perhaps other than the US and China. But there are a lot of promising projects coming out of here. Power Ledger is probably the biggest cryptocurrency that's come out of Australia, and they look to be working on something really interesting. But if you were to look at privacy projects in Australia, we're probably one of the only ones who is kind of trying to innovate in the privacy space in Australia.
Fantastic. Well, before I let you go, could I just ask that you remind the listeners of where they can find you guys online, and maybe contact a member of your team if they have any questions, because I'm conscious we've covered a lot of ground today and probably going to leave people with more questions as well.
Yeah, no worries. The best places to look us up is to Google Loki Network, and you can hit our website, and that has all of the relevant links in it. Or search up This is Loki on YouTube, and you can watch a short informational video about Loki. And there's a bunch of videos on our YouTube if you want to learn that way. I find people who are interested in podcasts are usually interested in listening to people ramble on like me. So maybe it's best to hit up our YouTube and check out some of our videos. So just look up Loki Coin or Loki Network, and you'll run into us on YouTube.
Excellent. Well, I'll add all those links to the show notes just so people can find you nice and easily. And privacy is such a big topic at the moment, and for good reason too. And I think you've shed a lot of light on this, not only the problems, but the solutions we can put into place going forward. So I wish you the best of luck for the future, and a big thank you for coming on and making us all aware of the Loki project. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Neil.
I often get frustrated when I just hear people talking about blockchain or crypto and how it's going to make them rich, or throwing money at the next big thing. But the real value is real-world solutions and solving real problems. So yes, I'm one of them annoying guys that's in it for the tech. But the potential for technological solutions to prevent sensitive consumer information from being accessed without consent is something that Loki seem to be going after. And that's got to be a great thing. And after also recognising the current failures of centralised databases and the potential benefits of decentralised networks, this is something that's only going to increase. Because the potential for applications of private-centric technologies, including financial and banking transactions and transfer of sensitive data such as intellectual property or medical records, private messaging services, etc., these are all exciting aspects of real problems that technology can solve. So kudos to Kee Jeffreys for not only going after this with Loki, but also sharing his story with us today. But I do wonder who that guy was that was sat at the back that suggested the name Loki. I wonder if it was my friend Johnny Ellis, who was watching one too many Marvel movies and doesn't realise what he's created. But that's another story. As always, let me know your thoughts of today's episode by emailing me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, tweet me at Neil C. Hughes, or visit my website, techblogwriter.co.uk. And if you go to podcasts, you will be able to record me a virtual voicemail too. But I must admit, I still get a kick from speaking with people every day from all over the world, solving real problems and using technology to solve real problems. But you know what's even better than that? Thinking that you, yes you, listening all over the world, have invested your time to hit play on a random podcast and spend 30 minutes or so with me every day. So you could be walking the dog, at the gym, on the way to work, in cities or a small village, anywhere in the world. And if that isn't proof that technology works best when it brings people together, I don't know what is. What I'm trying to say, in a long-winded, mansplaining kind of way, is thanks for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you for stopping by. And I hope you'll join me again tomorrow. But until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thanks for listening to the Tech Blog Writer Podcast. Until next time, remember, technology is best when it brings people together.